Hi everyone, my name is Tibus and I am the Operation Manager at TechSoup Canada. I would like to welcome and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Finding Meaning in the Numbers, How to Make Data-Informed Decisions Across Your Organization. Before we get started, I would like to quickly introduce you to TechSoup Canada. Our mission is to help nonprofits use technology effectively, and we accomplish this in two ways. The first is to make technology products affordable through our technology donation program. We partner with tech companies such as Microsoft, Adobe, Symantec, and offer their products as either an outright donation or at a significant discount for charities, nonprofits, and libraries across Canada. Membership is free, and it gets you access to donated and discounted software from more than 30 tech companies. Through this program, we have helped over 31,400 nonprofits save more than $362 million in tech investments. The second way we try to help nonprofits use technology effectively is by creating and curating nonprofit tech resources. We write blogs, create content on social media, host events and webinars, like this one, to help nonprofits learn more about the technologies that can help them in their day-to-day work. So if there is a topic you would like to learn about, please let us know. We are always eager to get feedback from our members. For today's webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side to change your audio settings, answer your questions, or chat with us. At the end of the webinar presentation, we'll have a formal Q&A session where I will ask questions to the speaker on your behalf. Just a reminder that you are on mute, so if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to chat to us in the question box. Also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded on the website shortly. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Ben is the communication coordinator at TechSoup Canada, and his goal is to create digital content that make life easier for nonprofits across Canada. With an extensive background in social sector communications and facilitation, Ben has also published hundreds of articles and a book as a ghostwriter for business leaders. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the question over to Ben.
Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. Great. Okay, so everybody, I'm so happy to be giving this presentation today. I am not someone with a data background. I'm not a data analyst or data scientist. In fact, I have math anxiety. So here in TechSoup Canada, I have learned what it means to make data-informed decisions. I have seen it at both an operational level within the marketing department where I work, but across the entire organization as well. And I have to say, having worked with nonprofits for the better part of a decade, data can be so transformative in terms of making strategic decisions, both big and small, bringing a team together and getting everyone on the same page. When you're tracking the right data and you're measuring it, it just can add so much to the way you work and pursue your mission. So with that in mind, I'm going to read this quote from UNICEF. Data do not of themselves change the world. They make change possible by identifying needs, supporting advocacy, and gauging progress. Now, most people know UNICEF is coming from a humanitarian background. They're looking specifically at humanitarian crises and relief. But whatever your organizational focus is, whether you're a small nonprofit operating within the community, or you're a library, or whoever you might be, and whatever goals you might be pursuing, when you're tracking and measuring the right data, you can benefit from that. So no matter what your focus, no matter what your organizational size, or composition or team, when you are using numbers to explore the best possible options, you can really transform the way you make decisions. So I'm getting now into a bit about the benefits of measuring data, but before I go into the specifics, I want to briefly and very broadly define what we're talking about when we talk about data. We had a webinar not too long ago with a data analyst named Julian Eaglestaff, who said data is everything and everything is data. Anything from your website analytics to the emails you're receiving in your inboxes, to client reporting that you might be doing, to fundraising, constituent relationship management, all of these things are rich and vital sources of data. You may be tracking many of them. You may not be tracking any of them. But basically, when you have a grasp on what these sources of data can tell you, and you have systems in place for tracking that data and making sense of it and integrating that data into the way you make strategic decisions, you are able to improve your work. You're able to multiply your impact. You can better understand the people you're serving. You can demonstrate accountability to those people, to partners, to donors, to funders. You can also make better forecasts by looking in the past what has been effective, what has not been effective, and tweaking decisions based on that past data. And you can know what's effective. Basically, you can tailor your processes and your operations to maximize effectiveness, because the numbers will bear that out. But like any tech initiative, like any digital initiative, it's really important to understand the psychological and social factors that go into both helping and hindering an adoption of data-informed decision-making. So very, like in a broad overview of what those stages of data and measurement acceptance might be, basically on one side of the spectrum, you have complete denial. These are organizations and people within your organization that are saying like, data is not for us. We're either too small or we're too focused on something that's too hard to understand or hard to track. But basically it's not for us. And often underneath that, there's a fear. That stage of fear is, basically what if we measure something and it shows that what we're doing is not effective? And, that's a fear that, if you have it, actually look towards what you're saying. If you're not being effective and the data bears that out, that's actually a very good thing, because then you can adjust, you can tweak, you can move towards figuring out what's not effective and move towards what is. I'm going to assume, there's sort of a bell curve in the social sector where we all know data is good. It's become this buzzword. We know we're supposed to be tracking it. We probably have some systems in place. But there's confusion about how to implement it. What do we do? What are those systems that we should do? How do we do this on a day-to-day basis? So that's going to be the focus of our presentation today. Because once you're through that confusion, and you can get there, trust me, because I've been there myself, the delight that you'll feel at being able to point to the numbers and the figures that bear out what you're doing and that can guide you towards making better decisions is really wonderful. And finally, you can be at a data-informed decision-making process. And the ideal is not just that you as an individual or your team as an individual team within your organization gets there, but that actually your entire organization makes decisions that are informed by data. So we'll talk about how to get there, but it's very important to ground everything we do in the kind of psychological, social factors behind adoption, because ultimately that will be the determining factor in terms of do your data efforts succeed or fail. Okay, so to give you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, so we've just talked about these psychological factors. From here, we're going to move into some key concepts. I'm going to focus on two key terms. One is business intelligence and the other is big data, and we're going to talk about those and what those two things can do in distinct and interlocking ways. From there, we're going to move on to some case studies to see this in action. And after the case studies, we're going to talk about, on a practical level, what is the data journey? Like, what does it mean to get from knowing to doing on a day-to-day basis? How do you incorporate this into the way you work? And then finally, I'm going to close with a very, very broad overview of tools for dashboarding and getting insight into your data and making those decisions. And it will be pretty high level, but we have lots and lots of learning resources around tools and also around some of the other stuff we'll be talking about on our website that you can access. All right, so let's start with some key terms. We're going to talk in this section about two concepts that you probably have heard of: business intelligence and big data. And we're going to cut through the hype. The goal here is to create a fluid and dynamic strategy that actually melds these two concepts, that uses each to its full potential and in an interlocking way. So we're going to start by defining business intelligence. Business intelligence is a set of analytical tools and practices for dealing with data. BI gives you answers to the questions you're already asking. What are those questions? Who are the people we serve? Which months are we the most active? Which programs give in the most revenue? These are just three hypothetical questions that you probably are already asking yourself. There are limitless questions, but the key thing to realize here is that with BI, you're asking questions that have tangible and concrete answers. And in this way, BI is descriptive. It describes what is or what was. And because of this, the analogy that we're going to use moving forward is using BI is like going fishing in the lake. When you fish in the lake, it's a lake that you know well. You know the parameters, you know the boundaries. It may be very deep, but for the most part, you know what you're going to find. So here's just a smattering of sample questions that probably pertain to what you're doing, but there are obviously many that are specific to your organization. These questions are how you gauge the success of your programs and how you figure out where you need to focus more energy and intention into. All right, from here, we're going to transfer to big data. Big data is even more hyped up than business intelligence. Big data is like fishing in the ocean, whereas the lake is bounded and you know the parameters. When you're looking to big data for insight, basically you're going out into the middle of the ocean and you don't know what you're going to find. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Big data is big because of what are called the 3 or sometimes 4 V's. The first is velocity. This data is coming in fast. It's coming in at a high volume. There are mountains of it. It's just like a never-ending supply. And it also comes in a variety of formats. In one of the case studies we're going to get to in a minute, the formats that a particular organization we're looking at range from everything from their website analytics to their conference attendance-ship to their social media touches to the records that they keep. So it comes in all of these different formats. And then the 4th V that's sometimes discussed is the veracity, where you need to have a discerning way to see, is this data true or not? Should we actually be paying attention to it? Is it a credible source? So when you go fishing in the ocean for big data, you basically go out into the middle and you don't have a set of questions that have concrete answers in mind. You're looking at the numbers and you're trying to extrapolate what they might show you. So for example, you're looking for trends or spikes or lows or patterns. And when you find those things, you say, huh, that's interesting. I wonder what caused that spike, or why might this be a low, not just within our organization in terms of revenue or what have you, but throughout our entire sector or industry. What are some of the factors that we don't necessarily consider on a day-to-day basis that could be influencing the way we pursue our mission? So in this way, big data is not necessarily about finding answers, concrete answers. It's about developing a set of questions that you should be asking for your organization. These are the questions that can help you shape the way you understand how you're operating. So why people get so excited about big data is that it allows us to do predictive marketing. But not just predictive marketing. When you're looking at big data and you're developing those questions around the factors that influence your organizational performance, you can predict more than marketing. You know, you can also predict other elements of your organizational operations, from everything from hiring to all sorts of analysis. Basically, when you equip yourself with big data, you can figure out, oh, this has happened because of this, and therefore in the future, this might happen. And we can do some scenario planning around getting to the best possible scenario. Okay, so that's BI and that's big data. And the goal here is not to say one is better than the other, because each are very distinct and they each have different potential. The goal is to actually create what we call an integrated data strategy. If you can melt the boundaries between BI and big data, you can use them in interlocking ways and both to their full potential. So I found this incredible picture from somewhere in Norway of a lake that sits 60 meters on top of the ocean. So that's really the goal here. You want to be able to go fishing in the ocean and at the lake whenever you need to. So you can go to big data to develop a set of questions, and then you can go to your business intelligence to measure your success in arriving at answers to those questions. So the goal, again, is melt those boundaries. And I guess if there's any takeaway from this presentation, it's that we should all visit Norway. Okay, so we've gone through the emotional factors around data-informed decision-making adoption within your organization. We've defined some key terms, and now we're going to do 2 case studies. After that, we'll move on to how to apply the data journey on a day-to-day basis and go into some tools to use. So in these 2 case studies, I want to give you an overview of what we'll talk about. The first is a very straightforward and almost linear example of an organization that used both big data and BI in interlocking ways and created an integrated data strategy to arrive at some data-informed decisions. And the second is a precautionary tale. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about data-driven decision-making, but that's not the same as data-informed decision-making, because the first and most obvious answer is not always the best and most informed decision. And you'll see why when we get to that case study. So our first case study comes from the American Society of Plant Biologists. This is an organization in the US dedicated to helping plant biology thrive as a science and as a practice. The ASPB was making, until pretty recently, was making most of their money in selling journal subscriptions. They run 3 different academic journals, and people would subscribe to them and institutions would subscribe to them, and that's really how they kept the lights on. That was their main source of income. But then there was what could be construed as a crisis. There was new regulation that mandated certain aspects of academic journals needed to be open access. So suddenly there was a wrench thrown in their traditional business model. All of a sudden, we can't earn most of our money. We can't rely on journal subscriptions to generate most of our revenue. So we as an organization need to reevaluate this business plan. So what did they do? They had a set of questions, right? Because of this crisis, we need to expand our revenue streams. We also need to figure out ways to engage non-members. You know, we've been using them as sort of our cash cow, but suddenly our membership options have to change. And also, how do we build a more inclusive brand and use this crisis as an opportunity to strengthen the plant science community, which is the main goal of the organization? So you'll see a quote over here from their digital strategy director who says, "We knew our opportunity was in the size of the community surrounding us. We had a world of people interacting with us, but we weren't calling them members." So the goal then was, how do we redefine our potential customer base and not just rely exclusively on our members? So what did the ASPB do? They took 19 separate data sources that ranged from everything from their journal subscription data to conference attendance-ship, to website analytics and social media touches, and comments on their website, and inbox operation stuff. And they took all these sources of data and they went back 10 years with it. And so they had an entire decade worth of data from these 19 disparate sources. And then, and I believe they hired a data specialist to do this for them, they scrubbed their data. That means they put all this data into uniform formats so that it could be compared and matched up across these disparate data sources. And in doing that, they identified 40,000 individuals who had interacted with their society more than twice over the past 10 years. So here they have now redefined their entire customer base. No longer are they a small core group of members. They're an entire society with 40,000 people that they can be focusing on as their new customer base. So they've gone to the big data, and now they need to figure out, okay, we've got a set of questions. What are the needs of this new database? How can we evolve our membership model to speak to them more directly? What tools and products might they find useful? And in coming up with these questions, they can start to develop new approaches. They can start to develop new programs and new operations for fulfilling those needs. And once they do that, they're able to go into their business intelligence to measure the effectiveness of all of these operations. Are we fulfilling these needs in a satisfactory way? Does this new experiment we're doing in terms of speaking to people who maybe attend our conferences but don't necessarily sign up for our journal subscriptions, are we speaking to them in a way that is effective to them and profitable for us in terms of pursuing our mission? All right, so our second case study comes from our very own TechSoup Canada. As I mentioned, this organization is the most data-informed organization that I've ever worked with. And I found this particular information, this example, very interesting because it really does define the difference between data-driven decision-making and data-informed decision-making. So on the presentation screen, you'll see the How Did You Hear About Us referral source dashboard from the dashboards that we use in the marketing department, because it's important for us to track how do people come to us? How do we get new members? And for us in this time period, we were seeing that our two highest referral sources were word of mouth. So that's when we go out and we speak at conferences or we engage the community in very organic ways, not salesy. You know, we're there and we're helping people use tech more effectively in a way that's very, very organic. And then the second highest referral source is through Google for Nonprofits. So this is a bit confusing because we validate organizations. I'm sure many of you listening, we've done this for you. We validate organizations as being eligible for the Google for Nonprofits program. So basically, if you want access to the Google Enterprise Suite for Nonprofits, that's stuff like Gmail and Google Drive and all sorts of other operational things that Google offers nonprofits, you come to us, we vet your organization and tell Google, okay, this organization meets your eligibility requirements. And then Google makes all those products available to you. So this turned out to be our second highest referral source. Lots of people were coming to us through the Google Nonprofits program specifically for validation services from us. So we see this, and I think maybe a knee-jerk reaction would be, great, these are our two highest referral sources. Let's double down our investment in word of mouth and Google for Nonprofits. Let's work on making that our two main focuses for our outreach efforts. But if we take that information and we look at some other data, which is not just who are which sources are sending us the greatest number of new clients, but we actually look at how much money do those new clients spend on our product catalog in terms of admin fees, then we actually see it's not Google for Nonprofits, because Google for Nonprofits, most people are coming to us specifically for that product, which is free, and then not necessarily getting access to other donated and discounted software through our product catalog. No, again, word of mouth turns out to have a very high return of investment. So lots of people that hear about us through these organic ways end up spending a lot of money on our product catalog. And then the other highest source of gross admin fee is through IT consultants and resellers. So these are people, you know, these are tech companies that say to their customers who are nonprofits, hey, you know, this software solution that I'm suggesting for you or that I'm implementing for you, if you sign up with TechSoup Canada, you can get that at a really steep discount, or you can get that at a donation. So these IT consultants are our second highest source of gross admin fees by referral. Okay, so another knee-jerk reaction might be, all right, great, these are our two highest ROIs. Let's invest everything we've got into word of mouth marketing and into IT consultants and referrals. Now, here's where a more subjective analysis becomes important. So we could do that. We could invest a lot into our IT consultants and referral sector and maybe set up some affiliate marketing sponsorship setups. We could do some partnerships that are, you know, really focused on milking that sector for as much money as we can get out of it. But how does that relate to our mission? The thing is, we're not a tech company. We are a nonprofit, and we are very, very committed to providing the nonprofit, charitable, and library sectors with the best tech solutions to help them achieve their mission in the best way. So we're really not a company that exists to sell software. We're much more values driven than that. We of course want to make money to keep the lights on in our office and pay salaries, but we're not going to throw away our values and just pursue profit over all else. So what we end up seeing in that is, okay, so we can keep everything we're doing in terms of the IT consultants and resellers because that's still a high ROI, but let's invest what we've got. Let's double down on word of mouth marketing because that aligns with our mission. Then we're out there in the community talking to people in real ways, not selling them or upselling them on anything. And so here we've arrived at a data-informed decision. We've taken the data, we've used it to, we've looked at, you know, where are our highest ROIs, and then we've run that through like a subjective values-driven analysis. And we've arrived at a truly data-informed decision that's also informed by organizational values and our mission. Okay, so now we've covered the emotional factors, we've covered some key concepts, and we've gone through case studies. Now it's time to talk about implementing your data journey on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? The data journey is one that's constantly evolving, and it never ends, really. There's no getting to a point where all of a sudden the systems are in place, so you can just sort of shelf it and forget it. Lots of organizations do that, and it's a waste because if you don't use your data, it will just kind of wither on the vine. It's not worth even implementing the systems because it won't produce anything effective for you. So I'm gonna take you through the data journey here, but focus right now on the center of the circle, which is in the center, the machine, the engine is constantly tweaking, learning, improving, and repeating. It's cyclical, always evolving, and it requires an intention, attention, and thoughtfulness. Okay, so step one of the data journey. You need to define your question. So what is the area you'd like to explore? What kind of decision are you making? And in this example, you'll see a whole list of different strategic goals. And the one we're going to focus on right now is email list building. The question is, how do we build our email list? Okay, so that's our broad question. Now we're going to narrow it down a little bit. What's our action question? So for this example, we're going to presume, I'm going to presume actually that you have some familiarity with Castle compliance. And if you don't, we have lots of great content on our website for learning more about it. But I'm going to presume most people know the difference between express consent and implied consent for email subscribers. If you don't, just assume that we have two segments in our email list. We have segment A, which is our express consent, and segment B, which is our implied consent. Now we want to know which segment is more engaged, which segment engages more with our email marketing efforts. Okay, so before I move on to the next stage, what's really important, and actually a suggestion from our data specialist, Donna, here on TechSoup Canada, is that it's really good to have data champions around each strategic goal. Because all of these things that we're talking about, efficiency of a process, email list building, social media outreach, they're disparate things, they're distinct, and if you can have someone invested or an entire team invested in tracking the data around that strategic goal, around that KPI, then you will have much more the likelihood of using that data in a productive way is greater, because people are invested in it and they learn how to use that data in effective ways and present it to the team in accessible ways. Okay, so step 2, now you have to choose your metrics. Like, what should you be measuring in this? We're looking at email lists, so I don't know, what does success look like? What could you be tracking? What decision do you want to make based on the data? And what data are you already tracking? We're going to talk more about that in the next step. But another great piece of advice, again from Donna, is to plan for different data scenarios. So in our example, we've got 2 email segments, A and B. And so we've got this question, which is more engaged? So there's really only a limited number of possible outcomes in this, in pursuit of this question. Either A is going to be more engaged, and it could be at varying degrees, or B is going to be more engaged, or they're going to be about par. So if you plan for those scenarios, you'll be setting yourself up for success, because you won't be surprised by any of your findings, because you'll know, okay, this is the scenario that I planned for, and these are the things that I want to do based on that finding. Okay, step 3, now it's time to assess and collect your data. And here it's really important to figure out, because a lot of people, when they start pursuing data measurement and tracking, they assume that they have to start from scratch. They assume that they have to build an entirely new system, and that it's going to be this entire new endeavor which requires a ton of energy. But that's not necessarily the case, because you are already collecting a ton of data and you're already doing analysis on that. So it's really important to figure out what are you already collecting, and once you look at that, then what are you missing in relation to this specific action question? And then based on that, based on where the gaps are, then you can start a new data collection process, which could be from any of the things you see on the screen right now. But it's really, really important to first know what you have and what you need before developing a new system for tracking something. And when you start to collect it clean, collect your data clean. There's an entire series of best practices around what's called data hygiene, and Julian Eaglestaff, again in a recent webinar, speaks really well to this. Data hygiene means that you're collecting data in ways, you're putting it into your database so that in ways that it's already in uniform categories, it's already in uniform formats, so that it can be compared very easily. And if you don't do this, you're going to end up spending a lot of time scrubbing your data, which means you're going to end up using a lot of time, energy, resources, and money in terms of putting your data into formats where it can be compared to one another across these different data sources. So if you do that, if you put the data into your database clean, then you don't have to do that redundant work. Step 4, now it's time to review and share your data. What does this mean? This means you've got the data in front of you, you've got your database, and you know what you need to extract, right? You have this action question, you have the metrics, and now it's time to look to the data that you've collected and extract the insight from it. You have to pull the relevant data and you run an analysis based on whatever metric and whatever goals you have in this particular data question. And then what you're going to do is you're going to record that data and you're going to highlight those key insights. And then very importantly, you share that with the team. And we'll talk more about dashboarding tools and what it means to, share things in an accessible way. But the likelihood is that your team the rest of your team won't need to drill down on the very, very minute details of your database. They're really going to want to know are like, what are the high level details? What are the high level insights? And how can we make this actionable in pursuing our mission? And then step 5 is using the data. And I mentioned before, a lot of organizations get through all the other steps, but then they never do anything with the data, which is really, really a waste, because unused data simply sits around and it just dies. It's not productive. It's not worth investing the energy and money and time and effort into collecting it. So a lot of people say like, okay, but how do I use the data? You know, how do I get to the point? We're so far from the point right now of, you know, doing this Mom's Rising style metrics Monday. How do we get there? And the answer is, it's very simple. It's not sexy. It's just like building any other habit, you know, whether that's, you know, a personal fitness goal, or if you're trying to quit smoking, you know, you need to break it down into manageable chunks. So the advice I got is do 5 minutes a day. Devote 5 minutes a day to trying to understand a specific data question, and then slowly build that out. Go from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. Ask 2 data questions in a day. And then eventually, as you start to build that out and build those kind of data muscles, your comfort in analyzing and tracking data, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're incorporating it into your meetings, and then you're going to get to the point where you're incorporating it into your team meetings, and data will become part of your decision-making process. So it's not only important that you're doing this and that you're building the habit, but that your entire team is doing this, because it does represent a culture shift to do data-informed decision-making across the entire organization. Everybody needs to have at least that basic comfort in asking those data questions, knowing where to go for those answers, and then figuring out how to apply that in like an integrated and holistic way. Okay, so we've been through the social factors, we've been through the key concepts, been through case studies, we've talked about day-to-day data journey. So now we're going to close before going to questions with the nuts and bolts, some dashboarding tools. So what is a dashboard? A dashboard gives you insight into your data in a way that makes it very easy to say, okay, here's how we might be able to apply this to our decision-making process. And so what you see on your screen right now, it really represents a spectrum. So far to the left, you have the static spreadsheet, and all the way to the right, you have custom dashboards. And over the course of that spectrum, you go from very, very manual and hands-on and really kind of clunky and time-consuming, all the way up to the fully automatic, fully integrated, fully real-time. And I think some people might make the mistake of saying, well, why would we bother with something manual and clunky? Let's just jump all the way to the custom dashboards. But that's not what we recommend you do. What we recommend is you learn to crawl before you walk. Like if you start working in a static spreadsheet, you're going to really build up those data muscles, and you're going to figure out, you're going to learn to be comfortable with experimenting with data, with getting a handle on what it might mean, with applying it to your informed decision-making processes, so that as you move across the spectrum, you don't feel lost. You really have a grasp on what you're doing and why. So let's start with spreadsheet dashboards. These are the ones that you probably are already quite familiar with. These are your Excels and your Google spreadsheets and all that. They're familiar tools. You don't need any IT expertise. You just need to be computer savvy, computer literate. Now, the drawbacks of these are that there's manual effort involved, and it can range from a little bit of manual effort to a ton of manual effort, because you're going to need to be importing data into the spreadsheet and then exporting it, and you're not getting real-time feedback in this because you do have to go through that manual process so often. That being said, when you're working with spreadsheets and templates in Excel and Google Docs, you've got like a sandbox in front of you. You can tweak it, you can play with it, you can work with it in ways where you're constantly learning and experimenting. And that's really where the benefit of this particular stage of the spectrum is. So here are some customized pre-built dashboards from this particular website, Chandu. There's many out there on the internet. Same for Google Sheets. There are lots of tutorials. There are lots of pre-built templates that you can use as you start to experiment and pull in data. Okay, so from there, from that totally manual process, you're going to move towards using built-in dashboards. So these are dashboards that come bundled with software that you're using. So for us, we use MailChimp in our email marketing efforts. And MailChimp pulls data from our email lists, from our email databases automatically and in real time. This is part of the service that MailChimp offers, and pretty much any other major email marketing service that you're going to use. And it's really wonderful because I can log in at 3 in the morning and look at how our last email marketing campaign did. And I often do this. I often spend a lot of sleepless nights looking at our data. I'm just kidding. So, but what's really beneficial about this is you get really deep insight. But what the con is, you only get that deep insight into one particular set of data. So in the MailChimp example, MailChimp only knows about what's happening within our email marketing efforts. It can't tell me about what's happening, you know, on our website or on other segments of our operations. SalesForce, just as an example, gives you some very beautiful, intuitive, easy to use dashboards. MailChimp, which I was just talking about. Google Analytics as well. I think probably a lot of people have Google Analytics set up on their website, but they're not necessarily using it to its full potential. So I would highly recommend taking some tutorials on figuring out what aspects of Google Analytics you want to be tracking and how you can make it work for your organization. Okay, so then moving along the spectrum, now we're getting into customized BI reporting dashboarding tools. So these are standalone tools. We use, for example, in TechSoup Canada, we use Zoho. And the benefit of this is that they can integrate multiple data sources and they're not bundled to one. Like MailChimp is bundled and specific to MailChimp, but with Zoho, we can pull information from our email marketing data, from our website data, from our operations data, and we can integrate those and look at this data, you know, from these disparate sources in ways that can reveal some real insights. Now, the cons of working with a BI standalone dashboard tool is it's a new system and it often requires tech-savvy staff or maybe even an IT consultant to help you get set up. Here's an example of what a Zoho report looks like. Qlik as well. And Tableau is a popular choice as well. So finally, now we're at the fully other side of the spectrum. We're looking at custom dashboards. These are dashboards that you actually hire someone to build for you. You hire a developer, you hire a data engineer to set up a completely customized, completely flexible, completely real-time dashboard that's pulling from all of the data sources that you want to see, none of the ones you don't. It's fully real-time. And if you need it, it can be a very, very powerful thing to have. I'd say probably most organizations are not at the point where they need it. And there's a little bit of liability too, because if you're working with a developer on building out a custom dashboard, you are beholden to that developer. And if they stop offering support, or if they get bought out by a bigger company, or if somehow they're not around anymore to give you that support, then you're kind of left high and dry. So you need the capacity to maintain it, and you need to be working with someone that you really trust and that you know will be around for a long time. Here's some really beautiful and intuitive examples from the One Acre Fund and from the Indianapolis Museum of Art. You know, they not only are looking at the data for themselves for making informed decisions, but they're also presenting it in a very compelling way to the people who are visiting their website. And so that's really the power of it. They can use it both to take an inward spotlight on what's happening and what's working within an organization, but also present that to the world in a way that shows what's effective and demonstrates accountability and shows how they're pursuing their mission. Okay, so that's the presentation that I have for you. I want to just again reiterate that within the topic of data specifically, we offer a lot of learning resources for free on our website at TechSoup Canada. There's also a lot of great free material out there all across, the NP Tech, nonprofit technology, internet space. I think the most important thing, the key takeaway is just experiment. Just get into the kind of data sandbox and start playing with it and see what are some of those insights that you can draw from it. And do that, again, as I said, for 5 minutes here, for 10 minutes there, just build that habit. And eventually you'll start to see a real difference in the way you approach strategic decision making. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take some questions from the audience. My colleague Yael has been collating them, so here I am.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your informative presentation. We have some time now for questions. So the first question is actually, before getting started with the question, if you haven't entered your question, please do so now by using the question chat box in your GoToWebinar panel. The first question is from Khadija. Can you please give a narrative for acquiring big data?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Acquiring data could mean a number of different things. Big data? So how do you get into big data? So I think that the case study I talked about is kind of a good example. Like when people talk about big data, often they're talking about like, what is the metadata that our mobile phones are sending to Apple or Google, like tracking our every movement. What are our smartwatches sending back to servers in Cupertino or something like that. And I'm sure there are inroads that the nonprofit sector could make in tracking that kind of big data and getting involved in it. Obviously, there are a lot of ethical issues involved in it, which is a subject for another webinar. But to take us back to that Society of Plant Biologists, their big data that they were focused on, they're going to the ocean was, let's collate all of the data that could possibly be relevant to us of people who have interacted with us in our organization, and also look at stuff from the rest of the industry. What's been happening in the academic science sector, what's been happening in the journal subscriptions throughout the entire industry, and then let's develop those questions. So when we talk about big data, there's really no line that says like, okay, now you're into the territory of big data. Before that, you were just looking at stuff that's relevant to your organization. Basically, anytime you're collating and comparing disparate data sources, you're looking at big data. I'm not sure if that's a satisfying answer.
Yeah, so we have a second question from Trevor Morse. Could you please elaborate on the concept of data champion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to embarrass my colleague Donna because I know she's listening. So the data champion was my term. Her term was, I think, a throat choke. Basically, you need someone who has a personal investment in a particular strategic goal or key performance indicator. Someone who understands the data sources and the systems for looking at the data source relevant to that particular goal. So, for me, if my main role within the marketing team is our email marketing campaigns, then my goal or my role within our data-informed decision-making processes should be to understand the data around our email marketing. I should be very familiar with what MailChimp shows us, with what success looks like, with the various factors that aren't working, that are working. so that I can bring that both to the head of marketing and the rest of the team when it's relevant for making decisions that involve our email marketing campaigns.
Thank you. So we have another question from Pete Woodsar. The Power BI by Microsoft can be a bit complex. Do you have any recommended free resources on how to learn it or make the best of it?
Learn what?
Power BI.
Power BI.
Power BI.
Power BI. So I don't know of any specific resources around Power BI as a specific data analysis platform, but I would imagine that the Microsoft, I forget what they call it, Microsoft Knowledge Base or Microsoft University, they offer some very comprehensive set of tutorials and resources that the few that I've looked at have been very accessible. I would start there, and then I would kind of build it out and maybe ask around on social media if there are any, anybody has any good recommendations for tutorials. Because for sure, coming to any platform that has its own functionality and can be very confusing and very intimidating. But getting a real grip on not only what your goals are within that platform, but also how that platform functions is it's very useful to do as much research and studying as you can.
We have a question from Lisa Deacon. What is your advice for an organization that is using data dashboard from MailChimp Analytics? What are the steps at this stage of maturity to begin to make data-informed decisions?
So again, like data-informed decision-making as a concept is, it basically means that whenever you're making a strategic decision, you are supporting that decision with insight from data that you're tracking. So if you're looking at MailChimp and you're looking at your email marketing efforts, the starting point should not be necessarily how do we get more people to open our email campaigns, or how do we get, how do we boost our click-through rate? The starting point should be, what is our goal within our email marketing efforts? What is our broad goal that's tied to our mission as an organization? Because if you're focusing first on a specific key performance indicator or metric or something, then you may be missing the broader picture, because it's very easy to get wrapped up in anything you're tracking on just, let's get those numbers up, let's get the graph line to go steeper, because that can be very satisfying to see. But if that increase in that particular metric is not necessarily tied in a direct way towards achieving your mission, then you're kind of going down a dead end. So I'd say the most important thing is to ask your questions framed around your mission as an organization, and then going ever narrower into, okay, so here's our mission as an organization, here's how the work we do as a marketing department or as a finance department or as a whatever department relates to that mission. And then here in this very specific aspect of our marketing efforts, email marketing, this is how that ties back to both our departmental organizational goals and then the broader mission of the organization, and starting from there. And then those questions will become much more evident. What should we be tracking? How should we define what success is? How patient should we be in terms of looking at numbers and saying this number hasn't gone up? Does that really matter? Because it doesn't always. It doesn't always necessarily matter if your click-throughs aren't going up over the course of a period of time. What really matters is understanding the link between, to use that particular metric, the click-through rate and achieving your organizational mission.
Thank you. We might have time just for one or two more questions. So how much is a reasonable amount of time to spend looking at data?
I don't think there's really an answer to that question. I think it's going to depend on the individual and on the organization, and again, what are the goals of that organization? I would say if you're looking at data and it's distracting you from your core operations or distracting you from from achieving your mission or doing what you have to do, then that's anytime you're doing that, it's an unreasonable amount of time. But again, if you're building out those habits and you're learning how to deal with data and integrate it into the decisions that you're making, then that's, I think, a worthwhile use of your time, because it's only going to help you pursue your mission more effectively. And so that's, I guess, to kind of give a cop-out answer, use as much time as you need to get to a point where your decisions where your decision-making process is more effective, and don't skimp on time for experimenting and building up those data muscles and figuring out how to become very comfortable in applying that insights from the data to a decision-making process.
Thank you. When you are a relatively new or small nonprofit and your data streams are limited, what is the best way to move forward with data-informed decision?
Yeah, so again, I would say, like, you're right, and to talk back to the last question, it's like, you're right, you don't want to spend all of your time looking at spreadsheets and dashboards. Like, your core function as an organization is whatever your mission is, and it is to bring about whatever your organizational vision is. So I would say, as a small team, maybe pick a few of your operational areas that you would like to focus on in maybe this first stage of your data journey. That could be anything that you're working on, anything you're making strategic decisions around, whether that's your programming or your marketing efforts or your finances, and maybe limit it to between 1 and 3 choices, and then do all the things that we talked about. Build out that data journey, get to the point where you're putting systems in place, and just see what it feels like as a team. What does it feel like to spend 5 minutes a day, working your way up to bringing in data and on your regular meeting basis into your decision-making process? What are kind of the pain points? What works? What resources would you need to build this out across your entire organization? And what doesn't work, and like what's not effectively moving your mission forward? Because ultimately that is the goal of this, and that's what makes data-informed decision-making a really powerful tool, because it's in service of your mission and your vision.
Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your knowledge with us today. And it is all the time that we have for today. I want to, once again, to thank you, Ben, for sharing. And I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us for this webinar. Just a reminder that we will post the recording of the webinar along with the slides and a recap to our website by next Monday. Also, please fill out the brief post-webinar survey that we launch after this session. If you have additional questions, or if we weren't able to answer your question today, thank you. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Please do feel free to email us, the TechSoup Canada team, with any questions or suggestions for webinars in the future, and we will get back to you as soon as we can.